Live from the Clarity from Chaos studios, heard worldwide, it's Dave Campbell. On every episode, Dave and his guests explore, discuss, and work on solutions to some of life's biggest challenges. So, if you're ready, be prepared to be enlightened, amused, and even shocked by what you hear. And now, the real, the authentic, the one and only Dave Campbell.
Welcome, and thank you for listening to Clarity from Chaos. I'm your host, Dave Campbell. On this episode, we're going to be examining the political corruption in this country, the rise of socialism, and the needed accountability of those we elected to represent us. In addition, we're going to be discussing the ongoing issues we are seeing in our sanctuary cities. Tonight, we are lucky to have back on the show a maverick, someone who is fighting evil every day. First, however, I want to talk about something of great importance. As you've heard me state, the problems we currently face in this country are not technology, they are not economic, they are not environmental, and believe it or not, they're not political. We've lost our moral compass, ladies and gentlemen, and this is because we no longer put God first. By not putting God first, we have allowed evil to come into the forefront of our country, and it is on display everywhere you look. Modern-day propaganda has everyone convinced that they are the center of the universe, and what they want or don't want is all that is important. Everything revolves around the individual. It's all me, 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 and basic right and wrong does not enter the discussion if it doesn't fit the individual's paradigm. This brainwashing has been going on for a long time and has now infected many generations. And it is my belief that we're at the point an intervention is needed. And that intervention is represented by first recognizing the ongoing effort to destroy Christianity in this country. Second, to reacquaint yourself with the church and the Bible. We need to come together and have faith in God and his ability to combat this evil. And the third intervention point is the use of prayer. Belief is what's needed now. Discard your negative thoughts and develop positive ones. As we strengthen our spiritual foundation, we must also address the practical challenges facing our communities, one being accountability of our leadership. To help us navigate these complex topics, we are joined once again by someone with deep expertise in the field, Mr. Jeff Dornik. Jeff is the founder and CEO of Pickaxe, a groundbreaking social media platform and the host of The Jeff Dornik Show, where he has interviewed some of the prominent voices of our time, such as Senator Ron Johnson, Kash Patel, and General Michael Flynn. He is also co-hosting a bold new weekly show with Matt Couch entitled Unsanctioned. And if that is not enough, Jeff is also the author of a soon-to-be-released new book titled Following the Leader. Welcome back, Jeff.
Hey, thanks for having me back on. I thoroughly enjoyed our last conversation, and I've been looking forward to it tonight.
Me too. Me too. So let's talk about the rise of socialism in this country, Jeff, because I don't think people are really dialed into what's going on here. And it's like it's on steroids. I mean, it's just popping up everywhere. And right now, Minneapolis, which we'll get to in a minute, is just a marker of what's going on out there. So your thoughts around this whole thing, because the DSA is now making a huge push in this country.
Yeah, so my thing, especially when it comes to socialism, and just I think to me even a bigger issue than let's say our traditional definition of socialism right now, but I think a bigger issue right now is this kind of collectivism that we find ourselves in,
Yeah.
and this idea of finding our identity in our team, right? Whether it's your political party, whether it's your political faction, whether it's your fill in the blank, whatever that might be, but people are finding their identity in these things. And I think that what happened, especially with this last shooting that happened up in Minneapolis, I think that really it was a really big eye opener to me about how the factions are working, is that people's minds were already made up before they had any information. It just depended on which team you're on. And one of the things that because I've kind of checked out from being a part of a team, so I kind of wait. I always tell everybody, I'm going to wait a little bit. I'm going to see what's going on. I'm going to ask questions. I'm like, hey, do you have this camera angle? Do you know what's going on here? What about this context? Whatever it is. And I found that I disagree with both both sides' conclusions. And I feel like the same thing has happened to my view on Israel and how we should be dealing with them. Is I feel like I don't fit in with either side because my identity is not found in those factions. And I think that that's a really big concern to me because yes, socialism and communism and Marxism on the left is extremely dangerous. But also, is it really that much better to be on the right where we're not really guided by principles, we're not really guided by truth, but we're just guided by the ends justify the means. This is how we win. This is how we defeat the other side. And to me, that's just, mutual destruction at a certain point. We're not really going to get anywhere. So what good is it to defeat socialism if we're just going to replace it with another corrupt system on the other side?
No, precisely. And that's why I, like you, have pretty much given up. And I feel like I'm sitting on, on an island all by myself, right? Because I have no use for either party. I was listening to the news earlier, and Tillis and a bunch of the other GOPs were now dumping on DHS and everything else. For the life of me, I don't know why, except that they're demonstrating that they're just as worried about the milk stool being yanked out from underneath them as the Democrats. The only difference is at the end of the day, who's got the car keys, right? Because that's really all it amounts to, is a fight over the car keys. Because the rest of us down here outside the castle walls, I don't think really have any bearing. They don't really consider us one way or the other. They throw a loaf of bread over the wall every once in a while to keep us from storming the gates with the pitchforks. But that's about it. I mean, there's all of these things going on that you and I, if we had done any of these things, would have been locked up and be walking around in an orange jumpsuit somewhere. But these people seem to have, this political shield, and the only thing I can think of is the other side isn't any more interested in the word accountability or responsibility than the other side is, right? And I think the only way that we're going to solve this problem is that our elected leaders have to eat the same dog food that they keep shoveling at us. When they pass a law, obviously their retirement plans aren't the same retirement plans that you and I get to deal with. Their health care isn't the same as that you and I get to deal with. The whole multitude of things. Obviously, if you go into political service for any period of time, a couple of terms, you become a multimillionaire. And that hasn't been explained to me one way, how that happens, because they don't seem to be that particularly bright, if you ask me. So I don't disagree with you at all. And to your point, I made the same comment over the weekend about the news about the shooting, because I hadn't heard any facts one way or the other. I hadn't seen a timeline. I hadn't seen any kind of actual conversation laying out the schedule of events and what happened. You have an individual has a concealed carry permit. Then all of a sudden, they're pulling a gun from him and he gets shot. Now, obviously, if you stick your face in into a situation where you're confronting a police officer, you're kind of aggravating the problem. But I don't know, and I don't know if you have, I haven't seen anything that really demonstrates the timeline of events that happened that caused the shooting.
Right. Well, this is my thing with the shooting specifically, is that, and number one, I want to preface this because I feel like, again, both sides are looking at it from whatever's their angle and their team, and I feel
Right.
like
Yep.
if you're doing that and you're starting out with a particular presupposition, and then you feel like anything that counters that narrative is an attack on ICE or an attack on my belief or anything like that, then it's like we're not going to get anywhere. I want to find out what's actually true, what actually happened. And from what I can piece together, I feel like should the guy, I mean, clearly he's on the guy that got shot and got killed. He's on the wrong side of the fight, right? He's fighting to keep illegals here. He opposes ICE, the whole deal. Okay, ideologically, I completely disagree with him. I am all for, I think if you're here illegally, you should be deported. And I think that there could be some different ways that we go about that, and that's a conversation to be had and all that kind of stuff. But in general, if you're here illegally, I don't believe that you should be here. You should go through the proper processes and all that kind of stuff. Okay, that's fine. I disagree with him. But the fact that I disagree with him doesn't necessarily in and of itself justify that he was killed. Okay, so that's not justification. Number two, you deal with Second Amendment. The very same people that are always about, you can't take away my Second Amendment rights, never take away my guns and all that kind of stuff. Kash Patel, who I've had on my show, he goes on Fox News, they're like, well, if you show up to a protest and you're armed, like it's kind of like you're asking for it. And I'm like, no,
No.
that's
Yeah.
not
No.
true either.
Right.
So I'm looking at this and I've watched so many different angles of this because in each time I get more and more frustrated because I feel like I can't trust anybody and anybody's commentary. All I can go on is what do I see? And I put myself in his place, right? Let's say the roles were reversed. Well, let's just say, and I wasn't there on J6. Let's say I was at J6 and then the police did something similar to me, right? I'm looking, I'm like, so the officers shoved a girl to the ground. Like she traveled probably 3 feet in the air and went to the ground. This guy came over, got in the middle. His back was to ICE and they pepper sprayed him. They reached over his shoulder and pepper sprayed him. Didn't brandish a gun. I don't even think that they knew that he was armed. And they pepper sprayed him. And I know that he had, been talking all day and getting in there, and that's fine. But his back was to ICE. He wasn't threatening. He wasn't doing anything like that. And they pepper sprayed him. I've never been pepper sprayed. I've got a family member who's a police officer that has been tased, the whole deal. It's no fun. Like it's very difficult to deal with that kind of stuff. So you're pepper sprayed, which kind of almost blinds you to a certain degree. And then after the police had and I put myself in his position, and I'm like, what if a girl that I knew was shoved to the ground in that fashion by a police officer? What would I stand back? Well, that's the police. I can't do anything. Or would I try to go over there and help and be like, guys, let's calm down. Like, let's not deal with this. Right? I would probably interject myself out of protection for the girl. It doesn't matter what your ideology is, right? So I'm dealing with that. And then I'm thinking, okay, so then they tackle him, get him onto the ground. Like, how would I act if all of a sudden I was pinned down by 7 people that I didn't feel like was justified and I had just been pepper sprayed, so I'm blind, I'm in pain? Like, would I just lie there, peacefully, or would you be writhing around in pain? Like, there's a lot of things at play here that all lead up to the shooting. And then you look at he's on all fours, he's face down. He had already been disarmed by the other police officer. At best, you could probably make the argument that maybe the one police officer didn't realize that he had been unarmed and he was reaching back there. But even then, you're like, is that justified? Is that just a justifiable shooting? Like, I'm looking at this, I'm trying to be as fair to both sides as I can. And this whole situation to me, if I back it up and I go all the way back to the beginning, had that one officer not shoved that girl 3 feet through the air to the ground, none of this would have happened. That guy wouldn't have been shot, wouldn't have been tackled, wouldn't have been pepper sprayed. And I feel, and this is me as a supporter of ICE and a supporter of the Trump administration and a supporter of deporting, illegals. What I fear is happening is that ICE is being put in situations that they're not necessarily trained to be put into, dealing with active protesters and all that kind of stuff. They're also, I feel like they're being emboldened by the Trump administration, by Homan, by Kristi Noem, and all that kind of stuff. They're getting a little aggressive. I've been seeing them taunting people. I've been seeing them inflaming situations unnecessarily. I did not feel like shoving that girl in the way that they did was necessarily the appropriate way of handling things. There's a lot of things at play, and I'm just like, should that guy have been there and doing what he was doing? No. But was that worth lethal force and taking a man's life? That's a little harder for me to wrap my head around. And then to hear the justification by Kash Patel and Kristi Noem and all that kind of stuff. Like, there's no evidence that he was there to assassinate ICE. Like, I'm sorry. He didn't brandish a weapon. He has a legal right to carry a, like, I'm just sitting here and I'm like, none of this makes sense. And I don't like opposing my team. And I just feel like with this whole thing, I feel like I'm being gaslit every time I turn around. And it's really, really frustrating.
Yeah. You almost can't be objective without pissing somebody off on one side or the other, right?
Totally. Right.
And that's actually ridiculous. The problem that I think has exacerbated the whole thing in Minneapolis is, I think the people, the paid protesters or whatever, have a very good idea of which buttons to push. And they've been pushing those buttons regularly now for days. Some people just don't have the constitutional makeup to tolerate that for a long extended period of time without going postal, right? And I think probably in this case, and it's just an assumption on my part. I don't know what the girl did to warrant the push. Was it excessive? Probably, but I think it was frustration, based on days of being hollered at and whatnot. But to your point, does that raise itself to the level of taking somebody's life, right? And to me, that there needed to be some kind of actual life-threatening event, some kind of harm that was going to happen, and I didn't see it. He'd been disarmed. The fact that somebody may or may not have been paying attention to what the hell was going on is problematic, but then to pull a firearm, I could understand the first one with Good because of the car situation and stuff like that. That I could understand,
Right.
because he was
I don't feel like my impression, it's 50-50 whether she was intentionally trying to take out the police officer, right? She could have gone
right.
either way. But I get from the police officer standpoint, it's like, okay,
Doesn't
there's a car
matter.
right here.
Yeah.
It's moving. I got to do
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't matter. It rather she was intending it or not. It happened, and he just reacted accordingly. In this case, I feel like I agree with you. I feel like we're being gaslit, and it just continues. And quite frankly, I'm so weary of it. I grew weary of it with COVID, and it's just continued. We had 4 years of being gaslit with Biden and those morons. I'm firmly a Trump supporter, but I think probably would have been a better decision early on was to have implemented the Insurrection Act and got the army or the armed services in there, just like Eisenhower did, to escort those girls into school. There wasn't any killings during that whole evolution because the show of force, right, was a pretty good barrier. But the fact that they're dragging their feet on these paid protesters, and I can't believe that they don't know where that money's coming from, who these idiots are. And quite frankly, Jeff, and I've made this comment before, I don't understand why they just don't get water trucks out there and water cannon them. Because at 40 degrees below zero, you hose somebody down, they're not going to be comfortable enough to stand around and scream and spit or whatever.
They'd
They're
freeze
going to
in
be
place.
trying. Yeah, they're going to be. Yeah, you're going to have little ice statues out there, or they're going to be scurrying for some place to get dry clothes. So, and then there wouldn't be any harm. There wouldn't be any firearms or anything else. I'd just hose them down and be done with it. I don't know. To me, I don't know what the end result is. And you mentioned earlier about different ways to do this. And I'm firmly convinced that it should be done. But I'm not sure the manner in which they're doing it couldn't be done a little smarter, maybe.
Yep. Well, I think so. One of my criticisms of the Trump administration is that everything that they've done for PR, to basically say, like, we're keeping our promises, not as much about what's going to be the most effective long-term solution to this problem. And I feel like that's kind of what's happening with Tom Homan and Kristi Noem in general, is they're going for what's going to get headlines, so that way Trump knows we are implementing the America First agenda. And I feel like that's been my criticism of Cash. It's been my criticism of RFK Jr. As much as I support them and like them and all that kind of stuff, there's not teeth to a lot of what's actually happening. With Homan, he's actually getting in there and causing a ruckus and causing things to happen. But is that necessarily what's going to be the most effective? I feel like there could be, like, obviously, get the criminals. One of the easiest ways to do that is let's go deal with the prisons. Like there's a lot of these illegals that are sitting there in prison right now. Like, whether it maybe theoretically, and again, I don't know all the logistics, maybe a judge would say, well, you can't take them out of prison and deport them, but you could wait until, okay, well, guess what? They're getting out of prison tomorrow. I can pick them up and we can deport them right away. We know they're a criminal. They were convicted, the whole deal. I feel like that's completely fair and legitimate. Let's deal with the criminals, the ones that are in prison. I think that's totally fair. I think one of the other things that you could do is actually go back to making it illegal to hire illegals here in the United States again and begin to prosecute, use the DOJ, begin to prosecute, basically make it to where if you're an illegal, you cannot work in the United States. And guess what will happen? They will self-deport because guess what? They can't survive. They can't live. The whole deal. I feel like that's another way to much more peacefully deal with this. You prosecute the businesses that are employing them as opposed to doing raids and the whole deal. There's a variety of ways that you can go about this. But the problem is that it may take 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. It's a much more long-term solution in order to implement it, and it's not going to get you the headlines to say we deported 5 million illegals in 1 year, kind of a headline. That I think that is kind of what the Trump administration is going for. And I think that's the difficult thing, is that it's what's best for the PR. It's not necessarily what's best for structural change here in the country.
Right. And I think what they're looking at is basically deporting a voting base, right? That's what they're looking at. And they're trying to get that voting base out of here to where it doesn't affect the next election. And because to your point, I haven't seen any logistics companies that have been hiring the illegal truck drivers that have been killing people left and right on the highways. I haven't seen one of them popped up on charges for hiring these people that are not qualified to be driving. And I don't really give a damn whether they've got a permit from California or Ohio or wherever else, right? The company should have its own standards when they hire a long haul driver, right? The license should be just gets them in the door, right? They ought to be able to articulate, English, understand, all the cultural attributes that they need to understand and everything else. But I haven't seen the first 18-wheel company hauled in and charged with hiring illegals. Not one. And rather their defense is, well, he had a commercial driver's license. Well, okay, the guy can't speak English, right? So how the hell did that happen? How do you expect him to drive across the country and he can't speak English? How can he read a sign? So on and so forth. So I agree with you, but I think, and it's unfortunate, but I agree with you that a lot of it is PR based. And if you turned off the tap on benefits and you didn't hire them and you prosecuted people that did hire them, only two things are going to happen. They're either going to migrate to a Minneapolis where they get crap for free, or to a California where they get crap for free. And that's only going to last so long, because the people in those states pulling that wagon are not going to pull it forever, right? So there's a solution to it. And I've yet to see Congress take up any kind of action on immigration. I haven't.
They don't want to.
Yeah, they don't.
That's the dirty secret. They don't want to because it's that wedge issue that as long as you don't solve it, then you can continue to campaign on it on whichever side you're on. That's the thing about politics that a lot of people don't understand. And I learned this firsthand during the recall election of Gavin Newsom out here in California, because when I was during the recall, I was working semi-adjacent with like the recall crowd and all that kind of stuff. And I was working on putting together a series of like get out the vote rallies around the state. And I was going to bring in mini AOC and do a debate with Sean Farash between AOC and Trump. Like it was gonna be fun. We get out the vote. I talked to all as many heads of the GOPs around the state. I talked to San Francisco, talked to Orange County, talked to everybody. Right? Nobody wanted to get involved, and I'm like, what the heck's going on? Like, why? And finally, I had somebody tell me, and they're like, okay, this is off the record. But Kevin McCarthy, who was Speaker of the House at the time, told us all basically, don't spend any money. Don't waste your energy on recalling. You can put on your website like, yeah, for sure, we want to recall Gavin Newsom, blah, 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 blah. But we don't actually want to recall him because we need a boogeyman to raise money for the upcoming midterm. So the Republican Party, led by Kevin McCarthy at the time, actually wanted to keep Gavin Newsom in office to continue to be worse for all of us Californians, so that way they could raise money and have a better election to send people into Washington, D.C. That is indicative of what is happening in politics. They always need a boogeyman to campaign against. That's also, go back to 2015, this is why the Republican Party was so outraged by Donald Trump is he was going to take away their money and their fundraising efforts if he actually got in there and built a wall and deported everybody. So that's why they opposed him, because he's like, they're like, well, here's my 58-point plan to fix illegal immigration that will never be implemented. And Trump comes in and says, okay, let's build a wall and kick them all out. Pretty simple solution. They're like, well, if he actually does that, then where does all of our fundraising go? That is the dirty game of politics that a lot of people don't realize that they are sucked into and are actually participating in on a daily basis with all this kind of stuff.
Right. With Musk exposed a great deal of this, and the fact that they haven't codified a lot of his findings to put into law to fix this stuff is a perfect example of what you just said, because they don't want it fixed. It's just like the NGOs out there that you and I know, and everybody else knows. It's the way that money gets laundered and gets into these situations, and the kickbacks to the campaigns and everything else, because all they would have to do is call up the IRS and pull their EIN number and say, you don't get it back. You can't be in business until you pass an audit. And something that simple against all of these NGOs out there that they continue to rail about, they won't do. They will not do. However, they did do that to a certain extent against the Tea Party and stuff like that, right?
Yep.
That's exactly what they did against the Tea Party, was they froze that EIN number and they couldn't do business as an organization. And unfortunately, that whole IRS issue is what is used now as pressure, and LBJ passed it many years ago, but that's the reason why you don't hear politics from the pulpit, is because the church fears losing their 501 tax status. Now, there's a few pastors out there that are actually putting their big boy pants on and taking this on, but not many, right? Not many at all, and not near what you would need to actually raise the voice of the Christian community in this country, which is pretty massive if they actually did it. I mean, I saw the other day that Franklin Graham even dropped being a Republican, is now an independent, because he'd had it. He's had it with the way the Republicans are acting, and I don't blame him. I think a lot of people. I think there's going to be a huge shift from Republican to independent in the midterms.
Well, I mean, I like during the last election cycle, like I left Team Trump and I endorsed Kennedy, obviously, until Kennedy came back into the fold with Trump. But it's because I was feeling like this very sentiment of kind of like what we're talking about, is I feel like I'm being gaslit. I don't necessarily trust the Republican Party to actually implement things. I mean, look at what happened the first term. Guess what's happening this time around? It's the exact same thing. The Congress isn't doing anything. We're going to get to the midterms, possibly lose the midterms, and then we're not going to have Congress anymore. And then what happens? The only thing that Trump will be able to do is executive order that'll be overturned with the stroke of a pen with the next president. Hopefully it's not Gavin Newsom. Like, when we look at it from that perspective, it's like, we keep playing this game over and over again. When are we going to wake up and realize? And it was really interesting. I had he's very fast become one of my favorite people to have on my show and interview. But he's a lifelong far leftist political cartoonist, Ted Rall. I've had him on my show a few times. I just had him on my show earlier, and it was really interesting because, like, if you actually take a step back from all the wedge issues that left and right can't actually agree on, like, a lot of people across the country, we agree on the really big issues. Like, we agree, like,
Yeah.
for a lot of us, like, get out of the foreign interventionist wars, right? We got to deal with AI that's going crazy. We got to deal with corruption. And it's like Bernie Sanders put out a report on what's happening with artificial intelligence and where it's going. I'm like, I 100% agree with him. Don't necessarily agree with him on his conclusions on, like, how do we fix this, which for him is universal basic income, more government, and all that kind of stuff. But we agree on the problem. There is a problem here, and I think that if more of us banded together, and forgot our party affiliations, but actually focused on the issues, we could probably find consensus in a lot of ways, or at least enough compromise to where we can compromise forward instead of backwards, which is typically what Republicans do. And it was really interesting talking to Ted about this too, because one of the things that we were talking about is it doesn't take that many people to sway an election. Because when you think about it, elections are typically 50-50 plus or minus a couple of percentage points, right?
Yep.
If you were to organize, and we were making the points that like protesting without a threat of anything or without leverage doesn't get you anything, right? And it's like if you were to organize 1 million people, right? Let's say Tea Party, what do they have? A few million people that were part of the
Yeah,
Tea
something
Party
like
kind
that.
of a thing.
Yeah.
If you organize that and you have an entire group of people that, a couple million people, like it's very small percentage wise compared to what do they have? 100 and some odd million people that vote in each election. But if you had a couple million, that's enough to sway an election. Now, all of a sudden, you go to the leadership of the Republican Party and or the Democrat Party, and you say, guess what? We need you to do this, 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 or we walk. They're going to listen to you. And it was really interesting. And everybody's like, well, there's no way. You can never go third party. You can never walk away from the Republic. It's a two-party system. You have to do it. Well, look at what happened with RFK Jr. RFK Jr. was able to sway the election for Donald Trump because he was running as an independent. And because he had garnered enough percentage of points, you could argue somewhere anywhere between 7% to 20%, depending on what polls you were looking at, that was enough to sway an election. Now, all of a sudden, he had leverage, right? So when Trump comes calling, what will it take in order for you to, come over and endorse me, blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, I'm concerned about vaccines. I'm concerned about the health. I'm concerned about HHS, blah, 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 blah. Now you have leverage to actually get some of your key things done. So he gets a position within HHS. But that wouldn't have happened had he not run third party because he had no leverage. That's the thing that I think that we need to realize. And there's another great example of this, which was Matt Gaetz when he took on Kevin McCarthy. He was able to oust Kevin McCarthy with 8 Republicans who basically said, McCarthy, you lied to us. You're going back on your promises. You're not keeping your word. So we're going to hold you accountable. It didn't take the entire Republican Party. It took being strategic with a small minority of people, and you figure out how to get leverage. Leverage is key. We keep complaining. We keep having protests. We keep showing up.
No.
But
Yep.
if you don't have leverage, then guess what? You get nothing done.
Yeah, you're just barking in the wind. But they went out of their way to castrate Gaetz. I mean, they just went out of their way after that whole thing. And I never could quite understand it because, I always kind of thought that Gaetz kind of had it going on. He understood a lot of stuff. And then all of a sudden, he was the Antichrist, and you never hear about him anymore. And my fear is like Fetterman, for example. He's the voice of reason across the board, but I've got a feeling that, at some point the radicals on the Democratic side are going to find some way to marginalize him. It just hasn't happened yet, but I just see it coming. And the other unfortunate part is I think if Fetterman was a lot more proactive in his communication on his positions and stuff like that, I think he would carry a lot more weight. But he tends to kind of set back and he's not out there beating on the pulpit, barking his viewpoint. It's unfortunate. But so we've talked about the midterms. What do you think is going to happen? Because obviously, if we lose the midterms, it's nothing going to be, the next 2 years of trying to, impeach Trump and God knows what all. And, it's nothing will get done, and the activist judges will have won. And which is another issue that Congress won't do anything about because they are federal judges. Congress has oversight on that whole situation, and they won't do a damn thing, which is just another example of lack of accountability and lack of any kind of integrity or character with the politicians that we elect. So I agree with you. I think if we could uncover a charismatic individual that could support a third party run to get enough people to leverage that may be about the only way to do this. I don't know.
Well, so a couple of things. So I think when we're dealing with the midterms, the problem that I have, and again, I'm going to vote Republican. I already know who I'm voting for in my district when it comes to who's running for Congress,
Right,
the whole deal. Like, fine. I'm not really excited, and I don't really feel all that motivated because what has voting Republican got us? Like the first term got us nothing, and they're going to say, "Oh, well, you need to get everybody fired up." But okay, well, you as the Republican Party could get everybody fired up by actually passing legislation that gets crap done. You could do that. Why do I have to gaslight everybody to get them fired up to vote for you so that way you can get nothing done again? Because we're now a year in and everything has been done by executive order. And then the only things that have been passed by legislation have been rife with pork and have all these ridiculous things in there. I mean, this last bill, it I think it supports like transgenderism and like, all these ridiculous things. And I'm like, you guys are the Republicans. Like, you guys are in leadership and you guys allow this to happen and you don't make a big deal about it. Like, even if they would just come out and say like, look, this was the only way that we could get it done, but we had to compromise somewhere in order to get enough, like something, but they try to gaslight us like, oh, this is the greatest legislation in the history of mankind, blah, 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 blah. That's the problem. And then they attack guys like Massey and Rand Paul as, traitors and Democrats and rhinos and the whole deal. And you're like, what? They're actually being principled. And I personally find that a lot more endearing than gaslighting. And that's just me. Maybe I'm the weird one in this whole scenario.
No, I agree with you completely.
Yeah.
So it is a quandary, and I think a lot of people in this country are stuck in the same bucket that you and I are stuck in, right? And it's funny because I see the lack of trust in corporate media as them, not particularly believing in the gaslighting, but unfortunately, Fox, they all are doing it. Every damn one of them. You can't turn on a news channel and actually get, like we started out the show with talking about, the actual timeline of events of a situation happening. And that should be the same timeline, the same discussion on every news outlet. There shouldn't be version A, B, C, D, E, F, and so on to suit which tribe you're talking to. It should be, here's the truth. Period. It's a little unvarnished and you may not like it, but here's the truth. I think people are hungering for it. I think the millennials, I think one of the reasons that Charlie Kirk was so popular was he was authentic, he was unvarnished, he just spoke the truth, and people rallied to that because they're so tired of being bullshitted.
Totally.
And that's kind of where we're at, and it's really, really unfortunate. And I agree with you. I think the only way to do it is to put together a mechanism that we could drop a wedge in between all of this and force them to take a step back and start acting like grown-ups again.
Yeah. Well,
Go ahead.
I think the thing is that, again, if we can figure out how do we and the people around us check out from this two-team sport mentality, I think we could start to make some ground. And also be willing to link arms with people that, like, you disagree on certain things, but maybe you agree on this one issue, right? It's like, and I've said it for a very long time, is like, I can deal with people that I disagree with if they're true believers, right? I can't deal with the grifters. I can't deal with the people that will say whatever it is and they'll change from to and fro depending on whose team it is. But I can deal with the true believers. Like, I could deal with a John Fetterman, like what you brought up. I could deal, like, I disagree with him on a lot of stuff, but I could deal with him, just like, Ted Rall, who I said I interviewed. Like, I can deal with him all day long, and he's a far leftist, blah 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 blah. But, like, I can deal with the true believers because you can rationally talk, you can come to some sort of conclusion, or like, we agree here, we disagree here, all that kind of stuff. And I think what we need to do is we really need to get people, if we can do nothing else, but get them to break away from the hold that the two-party system has over people. I'm not saying you have to go independent. I'm not saying you can't vote Republican. I'm not saying you can't vote Democrat. I'm not saying any of that. But they have this stranglehold over you to where they tell you, you have to vote this way or else the end of the world is going to happen.
Right. Yeah.
At a certain point, you have to realize that you don't always have to compromise. That you don't have to change your mind or change your position or change your vote. Your vote is your vote. You know what that means? That's your voice. You have a say in what happens in our country. And just because it's, the political party that's closest to your worldview, it doesn't mean that they have a stranglehold over your mind or your voice or your vote. You're your own person. You may agree with Republicans on 90% of things and disagree with them on 10% of the things. And maybe that 10% is enough for you to maybe change or not be motivated. Like, you are free as an American to have a voice that is basically just beholden to you and you alone. And I think that if we can get people to do that, then maybe we could start to see some of the right people showing up in the primaries, or getting some of the right bills passed, or having some individuality when it comes to the congressmen that we elect. But instead, it's like it's all or nothing all the time, and I can't get behind that. So like even with Pickaxe, like one of the things that we're doing, and we're organizing this right now is we're gonna do a series of events around the country, themed around the idea of declare your independence. And we're going to bring in some of our top creators and influencers and all that kind of stuff, and have panels and discussions and conversations and all that. And the entire idea is just not join our ideology, but think for yourself. And we'll have differing opinions, differing positions, and just realize you don't have to buy into whatever garbage the political parties are giving you, because typically the truth is not what they're telling you. The truth is somewhere either in the middle or this completely third option way off over here.
Way out. Yeah. Well, see, I think part of the problem, though, Jeff, is we quit teaching critical thinking in our schools a long time ago. And what you're seeing now, like I said in the monologue, what you're seeing now is nothing but pure propaganda. And people in Tribe A are literally scared to death that if they don't follow the mantra with Tribe A, they're going to get expelled. And then what? Their whole identity collapses, right? So that's the problem is we've got to get people to understand that they can, in fact, stand on their own 2 feet. They do, in fact, have the power to do what we're talking about, and they don't have to follow the piper off the end of the pier just because everybody else is, right? And that's the trick of it, is to start giving people the confidence to following their own heart, their own sense of right and wrong, which is embedded in all of us. We just choose not to listen to it a lot of times, right? So people that are listening to us, where can they find a Pickaxe? Where can they find your book? I think you have to pre-order your book at this point, right?
Yeah, pre-ordering the book. We're putting the final. It's taken a long time because, and a lot of like what I'm writing about in the book, it has to how the intelligence agencies have used that, going all the way back to the cults like Jim Jones and Charles Manson and all that kind of stuff, and it played out during COVID. It's playing out in politics and all these different tactics. And then we also take a look at like what the Bible says about it, and the Apostle Paul wrote about that. How Jesus confronted the leaders of his day, the whole deal. So you guys can pre-order that. Go to gatekeepersonline.com, which is the publishing company that we're putting it out with. And you guys can pre-order the book Following the Leader over there. I've also got a couple other books. One's called Church and State. The other one's Social Injustice that I put together as well. But right now, you guys can actually sign up for Pickaxe at pickaxe.com. You guys can set up an account. I'm going to be announcing here within a matter of days the official date of when we're launching the app. It'll be available in iOS and Android as well. And in the next couple of days, it'll be in the App Store, to where you guys will be able to pre-order it and then actually download it officially on launch day. And we'll be announcing all that kind of stuff, so you guys can just tune in. The best thing to do is just go to pickaxe.com. You guys can follow me over there. So you guys can subscribe to my email newsletter directly through Pickaxe. And then I go live with my own show, The Jeff Dornick Show, on Tuesdays and Thursdays on Rumble at 1:00 Eastern. And, like I just had Dinesh D'Souza on the show, kind of debating about Tucker Carlson and all that, which was fascinating. And I've got Joel Webbin coming on talking about the other side of the whole Israel debate. We've got some really fascinating conversations coming up. So that's Tuesdays and Thursdays on Rumble, and we go live at 1:00 Eastern.
Well, terrific. As always, sir, it's been an absolute pleasure. I look for these kinds of discussions, and it's just been great. So thank you very much for taking the time.
No, thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you again for listening to Clarity of Chaos. And remember, next time, look up and pray for guidance. Take care, everybody. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to listen to more Clarity from Chaos shows on demand, go to clarityfromchaos.buzzsprout.com or send Dave an email at info@clarityfromchaos.com for information on previous shows. You can also listen to the show on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Twitter, or Google Podcast. Until next time, please remember, it's not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Be well, everyone.